Hello again, everyone. It's nice to be back with you. And just apologise in advance if I'm a bit jaded. It was a bit of a rough night, so for reasons different to probably most of you. Anyway, so for the guys who are in the RA, we kind of covered most of what I'm talking about today. So this is just more like a novelty and superficial overview of kind of our journey so far. And I thought that the segue to use would be something a little bit different. So off we go. So as you know, our fair country and of Australia and New Zealand there, and we're obviously from the beautiful city of Perth. And for those of you who've been to Perth will recognise this scene quite well. So the city of Perth is metropolitan Perth, and it's served by a paramedic career cohort, and exclusively, and the rest of the state is kind of either hybrid models or a volunteer model. So a couple of years ago, Seattle and King County published these awesome figures of survivability, and our clinical services manager, Dion, I think quite flippantly, tried to find out where the books had been cooked. And we had a little look at it and thought, wow, that's kind of staggering. And he had the fortune to meet and talk to Michael Sayer and dig into the ins and outs of what those survival figures actually meant and how they actually got there. That kind of like changed our perspective on what we were doing as a service and as a state and where we could actually improve. So back at Belmont in Perth, which is where our headquarters is, this is where the journey kind of started. Dion spoke to our clinical services director, Paul Bailey, and said, listen, I think, we need to go to this resuscitation academy that Michael Sayers told us about, and let's see what we can do. So with the buy-in from Tony Ahern and the rest of the executive, off they went. But of course, before you go, you've got to kind of know what you're doing and where you are with it. And it's pointless going to go and find out where you can improve if you don't understand what you're actually doing before you do that. So we really needed to understand what our current practice was, both clinically and within the organizations from a systems point of view. And we needed to find out where we would focus our first improvement efforts. So, that was probably a very good move. So lucky for us in WA, this is Curtin University, and it's where our registry is held. And it gave us the tools to be able to benchmark ourselves against ourselves with a really credible set of numbers, and to understand a little bit more about where we were. Pre-crew, you'll see there is the pre-hospital resuscitation and emergency care research unit. Have I got that right, Steve? For the first time. And of course, they're always on hand to help us with any special projects or research that we needed to do in pursuit of this. So we knew we needed to say goodbye to our fair city and that lovely view of the Swan River that some of you might be familiar with, and go away and find out what other people were doing. So the journey took us across the sea and, unsurprisingly, landed us in this fair city. And it's where we first kind of went to the Resuscitation Academy and got exposed to those concepts, and they were really embedded in us and gave us a drive for some change. And most importantly, the high-performance CPR kind of concepts. We then saw what all the hype was about. But of course, when you've seen one academy, you've seen one academy. So the journey took us here as well, and the University of Arizona and the CPR University. And we really learned a lot about high-performance CPR, and as the RA had kind of given us in step 3, and what Peter Kudenchuk had told us all about the metrics of CPR was really underpinned here. And we managed to work out a few things that we needed to do when we came back home in terms of measuring how we perform currently. And of course, it's always good to have anecdotal stories and to find out what other people are doing and how they're getting on with the concepts that we've learned from those institutions. And so we needed to talk to other people independently and find out what their best practice was and where they'd got their successes and wins. And this is Hilton Head Island, and I'm sorry about the play bar at the bottom, but for those of you who are fans of Tom Buthelay or listened to any of his podcasts or read any of his material, he's a real advocate for cardiac and resuscitative care. And we just engaged with him informally and got some golden nuggets of information out of him and tried to work out, where implementation might work pretty well for us. So of course we came back home and we thought, how's this going to look for a diverse state such as ours with 2.5 million Ks, square Ks of coverage to do with a diverse and sparse population. So it kind of started to bed in just how much challenges we were going to be faced with. So it all came back to Belmont and headquarters, and this is where we just regrouped and said, right, how do we take these 10 steps and how do we implement them? The first thing we did was telephone CPR improvement, and we changed the AMPDS and ProQA version to get hands on chest quicker. But high-performance CPR there, as you can see, was kind of one of the things that I think initially we thought would be a project delayed to 2019, but we began to understand what we were actually teaching our clinicians in the college and what the implications would be if we delayed that. And so that project was brought a little bit forward, and thanks for that, Paul, threw me under the bus with that one. But it was something that was a good challenge to take on. So there were loads of things to think about in how was this model going to look, because we could quite easily have written it down on paper, and we could quite easily just presented it to the teaching establishments, the volley education and the volunteer education and the college for career staff, and said, just crack on with this, and then wondered why things wouldn't work. So this is just a random town in the middle of WA called Mount Magnet, and this is where the volunteer model, and in towns just like it across the state, kind of run. And the people that step up for their communities in our ambulances come from all walks of life, and they're not career staff. So we needed to make sure that we came up with a high-performance model that would suit their deployment, because people in cardiac arrest in this community are no less deserving of high standards and quality of care than people, say, in the metropolitan area. So we needed to make sure that the model suited them. And then we have other communities, mostly around the coast or Kalgoorlie, that actually work with more of a hybrid model. And we actually do refer to it as a hybrid model, but we wrote mixed on the ticker tape there. Sorry, Tony. But Broome is a paramedic volunteer crossover, and so now you've got volunteers working with paramedics, and they both need to be able to do the same high-performance CPR model for the same patient at the same time. The volley from Mount Magnet might relocate to Broome and still step up. And what's the point of having a completely different model when he walks into a career station and then has a complete new set of rules? So that was something that we needed to think about. But of course, when you come back to metropolitan Perth, that's where the majority of our cardiac arrests are because of the population density. All paramedics, all served by paramedics in that region, and of course, the model needed to suit the best because it's the most for the most, right? So that was a bit of a challenge, and I thought, well, it needs to be as similar as possible to serve the people of our great state. So early on in this whole journey, we thought about the human factors and the resistance that we might encounter and the challenges that our staff would say, and the flippant comments that come back from them just saying, you know, why are we changing unnecessarily? We do all right, you know. But we thought about it and thought about the non-technical skills of a team performance at a cardiac arrest. And this is where the lessons of aviation continue to serve us pretty well. So we were trying to think about how teams would work at a cardiac arrest rather than a leader who was trying to do various skills but still keep a handle on running the job, which is how we had evolved. So we engaged some advice from a gentleman called Tony Locke, who's a director of non-technical skills at Royal Perth Hospital and a pilot by background in CRM. And he was really valuable in just chatting to us about how he's seen pilots in both the military and in general aviation evolve and develop. And it was things like the checklists for safety. It was things about the check and challenge at an incident. And it was things about how people flow around the patient. It's things about how they can be challenged in a non-demeaning way. Because us paramedics are, you know, we don't take criticism well, generally, you know. And he also talked to us a little bit about how we train and how we educate, and more of a team assessment rather than an individual competencies assessment. And just worthy of mention is a gentleman by the name of Professor Bernard Crump, who's in the Warwick Medical School in the United Kingdom, and I had the pleasure to do a module when I was learning there. And he's an expert in leadership and management in the NHS, and I ran some of these ideas past him, and he very closely mirrored what Tony had told us. So really key to that was starting the conversation with our staff early on and being able to open the doors and say, challenge us, speak to us, ask us questions, and we flooded them with information. We gave them Tom Butherley's podcasts. We gave them Peter Kudenchuk's Science of CPR video. We told them to search Google and go and find out everything they could so that they were pre-primed, because we knew it would probably serve us pretty well when it came to the crunch. And of course, it all just culminates back here at Belmont headquarters. And just like a system saves a life, a system is required to make a change. And internally, all of our departments needed to really work closely together. We had to think outside the box. Avoiding unnecessary crossover at the resuscitation, at the patient receiving resuscitation by high-performance CPR-trained crews and non-high-performance CPR-trained crews. We wanted to really just avoid having that crossover and unintentionally having clinical chaos. So we needed rostering to really come on board with us and make sure that we were getting the right people coming to our education days and making sure that they were from the same clusters and areas and they'd be working together. The challenge then, of course, is back to volunteer education, and that's a different training arm altogether. And when you get to those places like Broome that I was talking about, you have the paramedics coming into Perth for the paramedic training, but the volunteers are normally taught locally. And volley education really needed to know where the paramedics were coming from those outside centres so that they could concentrate the volunteer education in those areas. So when the paramedics came back, they had competent crewmates to work with who were on board with the same model. So that was really, really important for us. And of course, the next challenge for us is how do we maintain the skills that we are spending a lot of money giving to people. And one of the lessons that we learned from Arizona was that as a great big state with a lot of rural towns with a very low frequency to cardiac arrest, is that they told us that they needed to go back every quarter or so and just reinforce the skills and the teachings and the high performance models that they'd taught them at the beginning. And that's something I think we pricked our ears up about and said we need to think about this a little bit more closely. So that's a challenge, but it's one we relish tackling because we know it's going to be good for our staff. So with 200 paramedics into about 850 on our training program so far, and I don't have a figure, but we've got countless volunteers of about 9,000 who have now been exposed to this. And I'm happy to report that the feedback from our staff so far has been pretty positive, and it seems that we've got good buy-in from our guys, and high-performance CPR is being embraced in WA. Thanks.